That's my first time as a creative director that I am setting the vision. But then, of course, I am setting the vision, and then I am designing the vision, and I am sending out the mechanicals of that vision.
You're probably doing a lot of sweeping up also.
Yes, exactly.
Hello and welcome to Did I Do That? Season 5. Guys, Burgers and Fries. It's a podcast about graphic designers and all the food rated at moderate speed or slower that we make on the way to making the fastest food of all. Because it's all part of the process, I'm Sean Schumacher, better known as graphic design podcasting's #1 Five Guys influencer. And joining me today, a very special guest to close out this season. You might know him from his 2009 viral video project Dancing in Public for 100 Days, from his incredible costume work, or his accolades as one of the One Club for Creativity's Young Guns in 2012. His past work took him to agencies and in-house positions at Mother, Anomaly, Stink Studios, MAC Cosmetics, and Besito Cannabis. These days, he serves as a senior creative at Wieden+Kennedy. It's Ely Kim!
Hi!
Thank you so much for being here, Ely. It's such a treat to have you in the studio on what I was worried was going to be just a terrible downpour of a day.
Well, thank you for having me. So exciting to be here, chatting with you, chatting about mistakes.
It's a very normal show, and that's just it. But Ely, you know your way around an ad agency at this point, and I wanted to pitch you and the listeners here today on something to kind of close out this season and this bit that I've been doing, trying to get Five Guys to sponsor this podcast. Is that okay with you? Would you be interested in that?
Oh yeah, love it.
Okay, so let me get into my pitch mode, my Steve. Let me channel Steve Jobs. Channeling Steve Jobs. Ooh. Insanely great. Okay. Ronald McDonald, the hamburger happy clown. Jack of In the Box fame. That little star that winks. Ben Affleck. These are the iconic mascots of fast food. And yet, the restaurant that I have been working my fingers to the bone trying to get to sponsor this podcast, by just sort of volunteering it all season, Five Guys Burgers and Fries, has none of their own. This is where my value to Five Guys as an expert in marketing adjacent work can finally be of use enough to them to notice. And so I thought, what is it that makes Five Guys different than the rest? What's their value proposition? As already established, it's not their food, which is very expensive. And I realized it is that there are many of them. Specifically, that there are 5 of them. This isn't a place owned by just Arby or the Junior that Carl has. It's really more of a collective. And so I'm excited to introduce today the thing that I think will finally get Five Guys on board with me and this podcast, my pitch for the Five Guys mascot, the Borg.
Yes. Yes.
Now, Ely, how familiar are you with the Borg?
Sounds Swedish.
Borka. Yeah. This is definitely the. If anyone out there doesn't know, they are a collective on Star Trek: The Next Generation. They're sort of known,
And Voyager.
They're definitely a lot more Voyager meat on that bone than there is even in TNG. But yeah, so they are, they're sort of floating around. You have a history with Star Trek from what I understand.
Slightly posters, action figures, making my sister film a commercial for Pepsi, on the bridge of the Enterprise.
What?
Yes, a 4th grade costume as I unfortunately at the time I was like, what Asian person can I be from Star Trek? So I just said I was Sulu's grandson. So a bit familiar with the Borg and Star Trek for sure.
I assume this is the bridge of the Enterprise in the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas.
If only, I mean, it was in my living room,
Oh.
But I went opening weekend to the Star Trek experience at the Las Vegas Hilton, which also, by the way, did you notice that in the Elvis movie, because Elvis performed at that hotel when it was the International.
Oh, yes.
There's a shot of it sort of flying in, and I believe it's supposed to be the late 80s, early 90s, and they actually have Star Trek The Experience on the sign outside.
Wow.
But it was incorrect because it hadn't opened yet when that movie was taking place. So I noticed that, but I like that they wanted to include that little tidbit about Star Trek The Experience.
Do you think those set designers were just like, oh, what was going on at the Hilton at this time? Oh God, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
We didn't even have Lance Burton. Yeah, it's so. That's quite the history. So you know of the Borg. You know of the Borg's many deeds and interests.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Over under, would you say the Borg would be a good mascot for Five Guys, or kind of what are the upsides? What are the downsides to you?
Yes, collective, working together perfectly in perfect unison. I don't know. Second, sort of no autonomy, no freedom, no breaks, no hours off.
I mean, I don't want to speak to what's in the management of Five Guys' heart, but who knows? It seems to be on the mind of a lot of managers of a lot of organizations these days.
You're right. I'm starting to notice a correlation there between the Borg and current management styles.
So, there's some positives, there's some negatives. I feel like it has the energy of maybe doing some brand integration also for Five Guys, which kind of doesn't have a lot of brand identity of its own. It's sort of red. It sort of has the energy of not quite Guy Fieri, but like a Guy Fieri adjacent place, maybe a place that Guy Fieri ate at once.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Has his portrait in it, like sort of a dictator in a country.
Way back when it was two guys.
Yeah, they've added too many guys. I think that's the problem. That's how they got too expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think this is a good pitch. I feel like there's a lot there. And I don't know. I want Five Guys to reach out now, and we can make this licensing deal happen. Now, we do need to get Paramount involved, and I feel like they're at a bit of a low point too. So maybe this is good for them.
They need this.
They have a service called Paramount Plus that no one subscribes to. I don't think anyone has ever subscribed to it even once. So.
Except sort of the Venn diagram between Star Trek and RuPaul's Drag Race, because they sort of have all the seasons of all of that. So yeah. I was definitely one of the first, and still a diehard Paramount Plus fan.
I mean, I'll confess, I'm also on Paramount Plus. There are 27 of us nationally, and we're keeping the entire Paramount movie studio afloat. But yeah, maybe this is, Five Guys clearly has a lot of money based on the quality of their food and the expensiveness of it. That money's got to be going somewhere. So maybe it goes to me, and maybe it goes to licensing the Borg. And keeping Paramount alive so they can finally make that next Star Trek movie that they've been promising now for, I think, 15 straight years. So yeah, I think this is a perfect fit. So Five Guys, this is your last chance. Get at me. But Eli, you didn't come here necessarily to talk about the Borg.
Well, I could. We definitely could take it there.
You came here to talk about your career, and we have a very similar kind of start to our stories. We both grew up in Las Vegas.
Yes, which just discovered this morning when calling you and realizing you had a Las Vegas area code. And then coming to find that we were in the same part of town.
Yeah, literally same neighborhood, 2 out of 3 of the same schools.
Yeah, that's wild.
It really, really a strange intersection to think that, like, here we are sitting in the same studio, and we probably have shared space in a totally different city before without realizing it.
Absolutely.
Like you lived next to my childhood park, which is super weird.
I mean, I think my 5th and 6th grade birthday parties were there.
Wow.
In April. You might have walked by seeing, who are those cool kids?
I may have had my head stuck in the play place area's rails yet again, because that was something I love to do. Put my head between those rails and then just go, oh, I can't get it back out. Whoops. I didn't learn that from the last time. Yeah, that fence was a disaster for me. But yeah, like I was also going through your Instagram. You are also a fan of one of my favorite places in Las Vegas, the Pepper Mill.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Do you want to tell folks what the Pepper Mill is if they've never been to this incredible place out of time?
Absolutely. The Pepper Mill is the best restaurant in Las Vegas from its inception, which was probably 60s, 70s. Is it older
I don't
than
know.
that?
I feel like it may have been that old, but there was definitely a remodel in 1987, and they're like, this is it.
Yes.
We will go this far and no further.
They've reached the pinnacle then, which, yes, we're talking cut mirror ceilings throughout, neons. There's the fire pit coming out of bright blue water, the fake trees inside the dining room. It's perfect.
Truly a miraculous place.
And it's still standing alone. Like, it was next to the Riviera. The Riviera is gone.
Yeah.
It was standing next to something that's gone. And it's just this one-story restaurant in the middle of the Strip. Pretty much every time I go to Las Vegas, it's a must. I have to go to Pepper Mill. Have to get our picture taken.
Which I did not know that they had picture taking. That had never occurred to me.
They sure do. And unfortunately, it's still that sort of old style where they print out like 8x10s and then bring it back to your table and say, do you want to buy this? And then you say no. And then you get like a very small postcard of it for free, I think.
Beautiful.
But yeah, the food, delicious, huge. Just remember that. I remember once going with friends in high school for dessert and we each got one. And it was just all leaving with huge bags of food. But yeah, Pepper Mill, incredible logo.
Unbeatable logo.
Yeah.
Shared by a seemingly unrelated Reno resort, too, that has none of the vibes.
Yes.
I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, Pepper Mill, even though that name does not inspire confidence that it's going to be a cool place, could they have picked a worse name? Because there's nothing that evokes less energy than, the Salt Mill? No, I need the Pepper Mill, please.
It was a little spicier. But I mean, also just iconic. It is that first scene in Showgirls when Naomi Malone arrives in Las Vegas. That's shot at the Pepper Mill where she's eating that burger, and it's just iconic Las Vegas. And it's probably the number one suggestion when people are asking me about Vegas tips when they're going. And no one's ever disappointed.
No, you will not be disappointed, although you will get to it in the middle of, I think the last time I went, it was just sort of rubble on either side.
Yes. Yes.
And you might feel a little sketched out, but it is a really great time. A place like nowhere else in the world, I have to think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you could have a whole investigation of why Las Vegas is making graphic designers, just sort of growing up there, it's obviously sort of a visual onslaught you're growing up around. And I always say too, I'm always like, if you're going to give me spectacle, give me some freaking spectacle, because I grew up in Las Vegas. I'll always say that. I'm like, my mall every weekend was a recreation of a ancient Roman village.
Yes, with a day-night cycle that was about half an hour long. Exactly.
So if that's just where I'm heading with my friends to go hit up the Cheesecake Factory and the Virgin Megastore.
Did you ever go to Planet Hollywood? Not the hotel, but the restaurant in the Forum Shops.
Oh, do I have a story about Planet Hollywood?
Please.
Just because in my junior high, there was a fundraiser where they had us go out into the streets trying to sell magazine subscriptions.
I love those.
I'm still like, how is that legal? This is legal child labor.
Yeah.
And the subscriptions are always like $30. They have none of the deals that you would get just doing a regular one.
Yeah.
But they were like, if you sell 30 subscriptions, you will win a limousine. A limousine will come and pick you and a chosen friend up, drive you to Caesar's Palace, and you will have a VIP lunch at Planet Hollywood, and you'll be driven back to school. And of course, as soon as that was announced, I was imagining my entire junior high school life changing. I was imagining the entire school coming out to wave goodbye as I'm, leaving in my limousine, and how much my life would change. I ended up selling 2 subscriptions.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think I got a free box of Gobstoppers. But that fantasy alone is what helped me strive for more and get out of Las Vegas. I was like, okay, no, I need a limousine lifestyle for sure.
Yeah, they sure did love to push those. I remember the magazines. At one point, we had braided bread that we were trying to sell to people, and they it was so strange what the model was, because they gave us, the students, the frozen braided bread and told us, put it in your freezers and then you can go sell it door to door. And it's like, I'm a kid. I don't know about keeping food like out of the danger zone temperature wise. I don't know about like, do I take the frozen breads door to door? It boggles my mind to think of how the many like layers of bad idea that went into making that bad idea.
That's wild. Like, imagining buying a loaf of bread from a child you don't know knocking on your door in Las Vegas, too. That's a lot.
Hey, I know you just got home from the casino, but I, a child, am here to sell you bread. Where's it been? Don't worry about that. How long has it been out of the freezer? Also, don't worry about that one. It's totally good. I'm good for it. I'm a child. You can trust me. I know nothing. Yeah, that's fascinating. But I'm so sad, though, that you did not get that Forum Shops incredible experience having Cap'n Crunch chicken fingers next to the...
Oh my God. And I mean, I was obsessed with Terminator 2 as my favorite movie for a lot of my childhood. And of course they had that Terminator robot in there and all sorts of great memorabilia. But in the end, I mean, I remember a few years later, there was like, I was student body president of my high school. And so we would often have like a monthly meeting with all the student body presidents of all the high schools in Las Vegas, which I always really loved. And our final luncheon was at Planet Hollywood.
Wow.
So I felt like a superstar for sure.
Well, you kind of got what felt like the presidential treatment.
Yes.
If you were to have won that. So this is kind of that as well.
Exactly.
Except you're literally student. I never thought about the idea that there would be like actual activities that you would do as student body president.
Yeah, it was, I mean, in Las Vegas, they kind of took it seriously because it was kind of, there was a head of student councils like at the district level. And she was real serious about us connecting and all of that stuff.
We are legitimate. We're gonna try as hard as we can.
Exactly.
Even though all our schools were built in the last 5 years and they all look like prisons. Yeah, anyone go look up my high school, which I believe is identical in design to your siblings' high school.
Yes.
Palo Verde High School. It is one of the bleakest looking buildings that I think you'll ever encounter. It is all rough face cinder block that looks like it was designed to keep people from escaping. The walls are like fully 20 feet high.
I had people stop me on the street before that were like from out of town, and they would point at a building and be like, "Excuse me, what is that?" I'm like, "It's a high school." And they were fully like, "We thought it was the prison, the county prison."
No, of course we keep our county prisons in high-rise buildings downtown.
Exactly.
The normal way that people do it. But high school, to circle back to high school, that is sort of where your graphic design journey starts, isn't it?
It sure is, yeah. I mean, I always like to say I went to a magnet high school in Las Vegas called ATech, where they offered graphic design as an elective you could choose from the very beginning, from freshman year. And I always like to say, you know, Las Vegas is very into themes, and that extends into high schools.
Oh, yeah.
There was so many themed high schools, you know, their magnet programs. And funny enough, it was like, growing up there, I was very into the resorts. And I mean, when my parents took me to the opening of New York, and the Luxor, so I was right there at the perfect time when Las Vegas was all trying to be for families, which is the best time actually to grow up there, because I was like, oh, the city's really catering to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was always like, oh, but we theme all of the high schools. And I actually was interested in that magnet program that was to get into hotel management.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then literally when I heard, oh, we wear blazers and you have to wear a suit because we're visiting these locations, immediately didn't even apply because I was just like, that's not me. That's not me. And then my older sister went to Las Vegas Academy, the arts high school.
Yeah.
So I was interested in that, but I was also kind of like, trying to forge my own path as a 14-year-old. And was thinking like, graphic design. What was so funny was the way they talked about the program was they called it computer art. And I was like, okay, like art plus computers. That sounds fun.
Sure.
And then, first, 14 years old, getting to get my hands on Illustrator, and I just kind of never looked back after that.
You recently gave a talk here at PSU, and you did share an image of your very first piece that you'd found. Graphics, art of the future.
Yes.
Which is actually a very ambitious first Illustrator piece. I was pretty impressed. You've gone all out with the gradient tool.
Yeah, discovering that gradient tool and what gradients on top of gradients on top of gradients look like. I was definitely like, oh yeah, this is the future of art for sure.
And literally, you put that on the thing, art of the future.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of a beautiful piece. It's one of those things where like sometimes those things that you make really early, you can actually imagine making at this point in your career where it's like, oh yeah, this is just fun. And it's really beautiful.
I would love every talk to start with like the literal first thing you did with that tool,
If I could make that happen, I would love it. Because I also feel like that does so much too, to unpack like for students, like the idea of like, oh yeah, you're maybe not making the thing you want to make right now. And like this person didn't just emerge fully formed with like perfect graphic design skills and like just, like leapt out of Zeus's forehead. No, like everybody is on a journey. And that was where your journey started, like doing. So what were you like doing in that class besides like making, kind of Illustrator pieces? Like,
yeah, it was interesting. It was definitely set up where like freshman year Illustrator, they introduced Photoshop sophomore year along with it was Quark. Like I literally was learning Quark as well as video editing. They were very into pushing Adobe Premiere and starting to do video editing.
This is a very elaborate like pathway. It's almost like a community college degree. It
was really cool. I have to say that it did a lot for me for sure, to just feel pretty certain at the beginning of college to be like, oh, I see the whole path ahead if I want to pursue this.
Yeah.
And of course, what's interesting is like, since that point too, I'm like, there's things I want to do beyond traditional graphic design. I'm using quotes just because I'm of the sort to say that everything is graphic design that you make. But it definitely sort of set this path of like, oh yeah, graphic design is using Illustrator or Photoshop, but it's also this video editing and, now introducing sound. Or I love talking about books as a time-based media, and just suddenly like you have this timeline of like this journey you're taking people on. So yeah, that high school experience was definitely very formative in just introducing me to all the tools. And yeah, the projects, of course, it was like at the beginning, it was a lot of instruction in Illustrator just to understand what you're doing within it. But I remember one of the first early ones was like pick someone to make a US stamp for, and then we were supposed to use Illustrator to make it. And I chose Bruce Lee, which I thought was just so fun too. I'm like, yeah, he needs to be on a stamp. And it was, and it was like literally illustrating the shadow in between his fists, like in Illustrator and all that. So yeah, it was just so cool. I think one thing you just said about like, everyone's ideas in their head and vision for what it can be is more advanced than your skills of actually executing it. And even for myself, I'm still on that journey of being able to execute better and more clearly the ideas that are floating around in my head.
I think that's a very amazing start to have. And from there, you end up going to Art Center for undergrad.
Yeah, it's like my older sister, always interested in photography and art in general, and then goes to the academy. And so she was a huge influence in me just being interested also in art. And we actually went down when she was like a freshman or sophomore. She wanted to check out Art Center, and I was in fourth grade. And I was just like, I want to go to this school too. I don't know for what. I knew it wasn't like, I kind of stayed away from photography a little bit just to be like not the annoying little brother, like doing everything his older sister was. So I was kind of like, there's something else here that I'd be interested in. I don't know what. But so very early on too, I was kind of like, okay, I want to go to art center.
Yeah. So you end up going to art center and moving out to LA to have to do it. I guess what is sort of because that's a pretty big like change culturally too.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in LA, and then my family moved to Las Vegas after third grade. So, and then I was there through high school, of course. I mean, we would be in LA a lot, family, grandma, so it felt connected to LA for sure. I think another huge part was that my sister was finishing college as well, so she wanted to move to LA. She studied film.
Oh.
And so, she needed to be in LA. So it was a kind of like, okay, we're kind of going out there together. Because Art Center, too, I mean, there wasn't any student housing. It's very much a sort of a commuter school.
Yeah.
So it was a little hard at 18 to be kind of entering an environment where everyone's kind of got their lives already going on, and they're just kind of going to school to do that part. So there wasn't a ton of that kind of collegiate life. And it was very much, which at the time too, for me, because I was so clear like about wanting to be a graphic designer, I was also like, okay, let's get through this. I'm here for this. Let's move on. I'm a designer. And the really funny part is that even the choice of Art Center came from they're all business, And that's what I wanted back then.
Yeah.
And so it almost to me feels reverse in a lot of ways, where like students who studied art in high school, or they know they're interested in something creative, and then sort of find graphic design later as the thing that allows them to be creative and have a business, or, make money, or, just that sort of commercial art output. And for me, it was the opposite, where I was like, as a young person, I'm like, business, business, business. And I remember even as a kid, like my sketchbook was full of logos of random patterns that I'm like, this would make a great carpet at the Rio.
Wow.
Like I would get a set of brushes, and then what I would paint, I'd be like, this would be a perfect carpet for the Rio Hotel.
Can I tell you, you actually might have loved UNLV, because my mentor there, Helga Watkins, hi Helga, although I don't think you listen to this. Helga was a big designer with casinos, and she had designed, like those lighted boards on slot machines. She designed the fountain at the Palazzo. And she designed carpet for a whole bunch of different casinos.
It's incredible.
And I remember her distinctly to this day talking about like, there's so much complexity in doing that, because you're trying to think of how is a carpet going to wear over like 10 years and hide like cigarette burns and random beer spills and stuff like that,
See, I never thought of carpet as a time-based media, but I think it is.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, it has its own life and evolves, and as anyone who's ridden the bus out here knows, those TriMet seating carpets really they take on a life of their own. It's a fascinating thing. But you're out at Art Center. Like, what do you end up doing while you're there in this kind of more businessy graphic design environment?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, it's so funny because I remember at the first, few terms, everything for the final presentation had to be shrink wrapped. Like,
what?
So we would do everything had to be mounted, shrink wrapped with like a template of the placard of your name in class. Everything was very regimented. And so what's interesting is that post Art Center, and as I'm starting to work around LA and starting to interact with graduates from other design schools in California, I remember being made fun of by some CalArt graduates because like all of my logos for the crit with our creative director was all like perfectly aligned, and they were just like so Art Center. And then
what a burn.
I was
wow.
So I was like, oh, does that bother you? And then I like made one crooked, and I was like, there, it looks like CalArts now. So, I mean, what's so fascinating is that I thought that's what I wanted. I was like, and again, too, I was like, yes, like international style, like modernism, this is it. And I actually remember in school, in a packaging design class, we were supposed to bring in 3, brands we thought had poor packaging that we were suggesting we would pick one to work on for the semester. And one of them was Trader Joe's that I chose. And I was like, oh, it's a mess. Everything's different. Of course, what I imagined in my head was like, I can't wait to make this Helvetica and like a single tomato on a white background. And as I was presenting the other brands, I think was like McCormick Spices and something else. And then I get to Trader Joe's and the teacher says, oh my God, yes, I love Trader Joe's. I love their packaging.
No.
And so I played along and I was like, oh yeah, it's so good.
We're definitely here because I love it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Also.
And it was so fascinating because it was the first time where I'm like, oh, right. Like the goal of graphic design isn't to make everything feel luxe and luxury, which was at the very beginning, which was just sort of the style I loved as well. It just, but it was so interesting to be like, oh, right. Like there's the quirk, the character, the uniqueness of design. And so it's interesting because it was sort of like post school when I'm actually working again in a lot of those spaces ad agencies as a designer. I was like, this is boring. This is like not, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So having that kind of business mindset from so early on sort of required me to decide I want to go to grad school and sort of have more time to figure out what my voice is in design. And so I always tell, students, anyone, like, you don't need grad school. You don't have to have it if you get to sort of focus on that as you're working and even in your own practice. For me, it was like, oh, I was in such a different part of my brain through that first half of design school, which again makes sense. There's so much to just technical knowledge you have to learn. But then suddenly I realized, oh, I'm not making the work that feels meaningful to me. So that's when I had to take the time to be like, okay, then I'm the only client. What's the work I'm making? And then that's what sort of made the shift towards grad school, because post undergrad, it just wasn't the work that was the most creative, the most interesting to me.
I mean, I feel like there's a lot, because I'm guessing you started at Art Center like at 18 probably too.
Yeah.
There is a lot of change that happens between those years, and then you get to like 23 or 24 and you're like, oh, I actually, if I could do it all over again, I wish I would have explored this or that or the other, but I was so locked in my own head. Like I felt that same way about my undergrad too. Like I was on a path that I thought made sense, and then at the very end of it, it's like, oh, there's this totally other thing, and then I get up here and there's this totally other thing, and it's like I do think there is a thing to like having some time to just breathe and think about like, well, what is it that I actually want? And what is the value to me from going to one of these places? Like, how am I going to push myself? And for you, like going to grad school, like really helped with that. So you went to Yale. You went all the way across the country to do that.
Yeah, I mean, because it was like the program was the complete opposite of what I had just done at Art Center. It was so open and really an MFA program where it was much more operating as an artist and exactly what I want to do or say. And I mean, what's so cool about that program is that it is so open that I would say individually, our theses were exploring such different things.
Now, you've also brought in a couple kind of pieces here. Do we want to talk about these at all?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I brought in, I couldn't find the final thing, but I found these sort of these kind of random exercises. But what this project was at Yale, we would do the beginning of our second year, every student would sort of show their thesis proposal, which included some writing as well as like 10 to 15 references of artists, etc., things in the world that sort of align with your thesis. And then one of the big projects that happened at the beginning of your second year is after that presentation, every student then has to put everyone's presentation into a book through the lens of your personal thesis.
Oh, interesting.
Suddenly. So this one was with Linda Van Dersen was heading this workshop. And so I came up with this idea of like, okay, there's 15 students. I'm going to assign each of them a different paper stock as well as a certain angle, because I was really interested in how I wanted ways to see all of our references kind of overlapping and mixing and all of that. But the funny part about it is, so there was like pictures printed, and so these were these dummies. I couldn't find the actual thing anymore. But Linda Van Dersen at the final critique at the end of the workshop was like, take this one for instance. What a stupid idea. And like all she could say is how stupid the idea is. She was like, 15 students, 15 angles, so you're gonna cut 15 angles out of the paper?
What the hell?
But then the whole thing was to be like, and then look how it ended up, and to say it was really good. But she would always preempt that with, look at this stupid idea, but see, if you just do it and sort of follow it, and because it ended up being kind of like more interesting than a lot of the other pieces, or pieces that were like not quite finished, but mine was just kind of so simple, done. And then also each book I constructed, like I made the pages so that they would be a different mix every copy I made, so that you're seeing different references all smashed up to one another. But I was like, I must have been so red, because just have this like, Dutch master coming, and everyone's so like in reverence to her. And in my critique, all she could say is, "What a dumb idea!" But that it was good, that it was a success.
That's definitely finding victory from the jaws of defeat, because that's a rough start.
Yeah,
that's really
exactly.
going to bring your emotional just like mood way down.
Yeah, it was so funny. It's so funny because part of it too for me was like learning. A sort of a mistake I felt like I made a lot was trying to imbue so much work and meaning into my work, where this was like ended up being such a formal exercise. Sometimes when I look to like favorite artists and stuff, it's like, oh, they didn't have this sort of end goal. They're just sort of like, what is the color blue? And, and then it's this, all these sort of like reflections on that color.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of that I loved, where it was kind of like the work can sometimes feel much worse when you're imbuing all this meaning versus, I am fully who I am, and this is what came out of me. Therefore, when you critique the work, you're looking at that and you're finding those connections. But it just being a fully formal, like, I want to mash these references together. How do I do it in a printed zine? Okay, you just cut little windows out so that these things can mix together. So I loved that, just learning like, oh, you just make the work and kind of what it means comes forward or shows up in the world.
I love that. I mean, and also what a cool like project just in general of like, you really have to be an active listener to be like taking in all of these different project proposals and reinterpreting them. And it's got to be so interesting to see like what other people think of what you propose too out of that.
For sure. Because it's interesting too, because I mean, again, my sort of thesis in school was about, I would say it's the frosting on the cake. It's not the cake itself. It's the styling, which is why I became a graphic designer, because I wanted to style things. I'm like the color, the font choices. I'm creating a look. And that wasn't necessarily the exploration of a lot of the other students in grad school, very research-based or this or that. So I was also a little freaked out by all the Dutch critics that come to Yale, and like, they're going to think I'm so silly? But they all loved it. I think it was also just a breath of fresh air, where it was like, yeah, my investigation into graphic design is something totally different from what you do. And, so that was really encouraging to be like, okay, no, of course they appreciate this like completely different perspective on it. But what's funny about this project too was the typography itself. When Linda would come and, check in on me and take a look at it, she'd be like, it's too pretty, it's too considered, it's too this. And like, I was so annoyed by that, because I'm like, so you want it like default. You're asking me like, why did I make that stylistic choice, right? Because for her, it was like the purity was to like pull everything back, like any kind of hierarchy that wasn't needed. She wants it pulled back. She wants it pared back. But for me, it was a kind of like, if a valid critique is why did you do that, I think a valid answer to that is why not? Because like, why wouldn't I do it? Like, again, this is my interpretation of their words, and this is what is feeling right to me. But at the same time, I'm like, I did push myself to do that, to see where it could end up. And I found a nice balance that also felt, again, like, I don't know, putting more onus on the words itself than the style of it. But it was so interesting, because I'm like, you're taking away everything why I want to be a graphic designer, which is to be a stylist. And you're telling me that the purest graphic design is to like strip all of that away.
Well, and that's such a fascinating, like, because I feel like I see that a lot in students that are really interested in that kind of like Dutch or even like mid-century design, where it's like it is so flat, and then that becomes its own stylistic choice that gets its own like fetishization, and it's just like, well, it's not really the base. That's just something that we've decided on, and when you use it, you're tapping into all these other cultural things. So it's not really pure in any more sense than any other form of design. Like, how is it more pure than a Word document, say? Like, just with
exactly.
the default styling. Like that, I think that's where I say that as like a recovering, like, I was a big believer in more of the mid-century aesthetic, and then it's just like, no, there's no, it's its own thing. There's no sense of classicism or anything like that. Like, that's all fantasy.
Yeah. And what's so funny is like the only time I'm using that style now is almost as parody.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's the other part of graphic design that I loved was parody.
Yeah.
Like just from the very beginning, it's like, oh, wait, okay, so you're a sandwich shop, but you're going to style it like an academic magazine. Like everything was about parody, about putting on a costume, about like, how do you style this to say what this brand, this project, this book is all about? So yeah, it's like that's the fun part. And it is very much the part that I'm like is imbued in me from my upbringing in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Is that kind of like I'm more interested in parody than the real thing. I've always said that, especially about like money or like wealth. Like Las Vegas, it's like grew up in a very humble home, but we can go get a steak and lobster dinner for $9.99. And so I always remember that too. Like junior high, every time we went out to dinner, it's like, Eli, what do you want? I go steak and lobster. Like it was always going to be the most expensive thing.
Yeah. Give me that shrimp cocktail. Don't worry about where they came from.
Exactly.
Here in the middle of the desert.
Exactly. So then that's the thing. It's like, oh, it's like what I'm enjoying about this dinner out in this, Roman village style dining room dripping in marble and gold is like, wow, this is what we think living it up is, And so it's like, that's so much more fascinating and interesting of like, how people want to participate in those spaces or cultures. I felt like, through graphic design, I get to do that. I get to make this like luxury product. I get to make this like hokey, funny, derpy thing. So it's like, to me, it was always like, you're putting on a costume. You're styling yourself to something. So, that was my whole investigation. It's because my thesis I titled "The Scale of Extravaganza," and it actually was the first time I was exploring my relationship as a designer with just my own personal history.
Yeah.
And so much became clear for me, the growing up in Las Vegas, like how that affected the ways and my opinions and tastes in graphic design. One just being like, give me spectacle, give me joy, give me something, make me feel something spectacular. So that was so much about the work I was exploring was very much that. And at the same time too, like just getting to explore, myself as a person and infusing that like directly into my design, often literally like me being the star. And of course, that's so often as a student, it's like, okay, I have this idea. You don't have anyone else to help you. So you often place yourself in to be that thing. But getting to so explicitly celebrate myself, like my personality, my physicalness, just sort of every aspect of me sort of starting to show up in my design work, which was so the opposite of art center and business and what's right for the brand. And then suddenly switching that to like, what am I making? What am I saying? What's right to me? It was such a huge shift for me.
Yeah, and I know you've shown in that talk some images of some of this work, like the costumes, the event invitations, like very elaborate, like not only like visual design, but also like video editing and like it's full on art direction that you're getting into at this time too. Like,
yeah, it's so funny because it's I'm in an MFA graphic design program and I had barely any typography. Like suddenly I realized, okay, when I want to make my own work, it was so image based, image making, video. And I think that's part of it too, is like this whole idea of creating that style or mood. Like, okay, there's what you can create in a poster. Then it's kind of like, that was fun. Then when I got to do my first book, and it's like, okay, now a time-based media. What comes next? What comes before? I'm like, okay, this is very exciting. Then the first time having to make a video piece, and suddenly now you have sound and pacing. So I feel like it's been this journey of getting to have more control over what your viewer is experiencing. So then I think the next extension of that was parties, because it was like, okay, now suddenly it's like, the smell, the music, like this, someone's whole experience is what I am designing. So that's kind of what came out of that, was like, okay, like there's I want to use graphic design to make people have an amazing experience, something really fun, get to be creative themselves. And so that's what just came forward, was that's what I was more interested in versus typography, layout, anything else.
You didn't need that hotel management program back in high school, because you have become the hotelier. But it's like, it's a remarkable thing to build community around your work too, and like be able to invite people in and have them have their own experiences. Like that's true experience design when you get right down to it. Also during this time, do we want to talk about Boombox at all?
Yeah, I mean, that project was my first semester at Yale, and Michael Beirut had done for several years this 100-day project. So that was it, was just for the next 100 days, I want you to pick something that you do, and then he'll show up 100 days later for the closing of this workshop. So, it was a graphic design program, so many people decided I'm going to have 5 minutes to design a poster every day, or I'm going to take a one photo on the way to class every day. And what was so cool about it was that no matter how mundane your sort of that initial prompt you gave yourself, was that once you have 100 of them, it just becomes something. You notice patterns, you notice something emerging from it.
Yeah.
So it was just such a cool thing, because it was really the exercise and learning about a practice itself versus so much the like final product. So for myself, I've always loved to dance ever since I was a kid, always wanted to move and shake my body. And as I got older, would still always love dancing with my friends. But if someone recorded it and tried to show me, I was mortified and just, just could not. I was like, I don't want to look at that, because I kept saying it would break a fantasy of what I was feeling and imagining what I was looking like. And then I see it, I'm like, oh, okay, it looks like that.
Yeah, the like hearing your own voice when you've been singing in the shower and you're like, oh, wow, I was not on tune at all.
Exactly. But yeah, by day 5, 6, I loved it. I was like, because then each day I would film myself in a different space, wearing a different outfit to a different song. And then suddenly by the time I had 6, 7, and I'm starting to, edit them together, I was like, oh my God, this is really fun. And I totally got over it. I was like, oh, I look great. Whatever. It was like, it wasn't about the technicality of my dancing at all. It was just that I was taking up space and having fun. And then suddenly with 100 of them, it becomes impressive, even though every day was like a little snippet of me dancing.
And there's such an energy and momentum to them too. Like you showed it as part of the talk, and and you can go find it online still, listeners, because this is an audio medium and we can't show you it. That's not how this works. But it's like it's especially by that last one, there is such a buildup that it is like this big cathartic party that you're in. Like really, I don't know, there's something like directorially that's really lovely about that.
Thank you so much. I mean, yeah. I always knew that like 100th day, that's when other people are with me.
Yeah.
And the most interesting part to me too is that it's a piece of my work that was a student project back in 2009 and is still getting me attention and jobs and people reaching out. That's what was so exciting, was that like I sent my work to Wieden+Kennedy post undergrad. Here's my graphic design work. Here's what I can do for you. And, never heard anything back. And then suddenly sort of post grad school where my work was all personal, because really the work I showed originally was, yeah, my thesis book. I'm in 90% of my work. It's that dance video. And then that's when I get a call back,
Yeah.
And so that's definitely just a message I have for everyone, is that when you think about the designers, the artists that you're really inspired by, it is because of their idiosyncrasies, about what makes them so unique as a person. It's not always, oh, they have the best rag,
Yeah. Wow, the paragraphs have such a good rag here.
Yeah.
No widows, no orphans. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, because I think you're right. I think there is a truth that really comes through, and if you don't see it like that it just feels like there's a missing thing. And I mean, I think that's also a good lesson for students, to be like, don't necessarily make the work that you think a place is going to want, because if they want something, they'll want you. And if that you is not present in that other work that you're kind of finagling into place, then they're going to see it. They're going to see it from a million miles away.
I mean, one of the best parts of that whole experience was seeing the discourse at Yale and seeing the discourse on Vimeo comments. Because at Yale, suddenly, I mean, there was stuff I was doing I wasn't even aware of, like, wow, look how you're activating this empty space with your queer body. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, that is what, I mean, and it literally is what I'm doing. But again, I was not thinking about that at all. I was doing something that was very personal, something that was very much for the joy of it. I'm getting to engage with my work in that way, with all these super smart critics talking about my work in that way. And then I go look at the comments, and one of the best ones was 100 days, 100 songs, 100 t-shirts, 1 pair of pants. Which literally got me to watch the whole video again and count the pants, and there were 6.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a very good amount of pants, honestly.
I mean, how many pants do you need, really?
I don't think... If people have as many pants as they have shirts, I don't know what they're doing.
Exactly.
That feels like a waste.
So I don't know.
Fascinating.
Especially as designers as well, versus, calling ourselves artists. I think that's part of it, is that we invite that kind of engagement on both spectrums, which is so fun and exactly what it is. Because again, like, so much of what we make is meant to be interacted with, read, people to understand something, learn something, enjoy something. So getting that kind of engagement on both sides of a personal project was really fascinating.
Yeah, I think that is really beautiful.
Yeah, so post-grad school, I definitely knew, okay, calling myself an art director and sort of the work of an art director was a bit closer to what I was more interested in now post-grad school. So it was really after 2010, after finishing my MFA, that I sort of switched the title and started seeking art direction work. And it actually was, I was speaking to Wieden earlier, just post-grad school, they offered me an internship to come out to Portland. So this was fall of 2010.
Wow.
And so I said, okay, let's do this. Let's see what this feels like. And at the time, I had just moved with all these close friends I made in grad school. Everyone essentially moved to Brooklyn, and we're all looking for jobs. And when this opportunity came up, essentially the recruiter asked, would you like to move to Portland? And I said, I just moved to New York, so I'm not sure if that's what I want right now. But they offered, why don't you come out for 3 months and feel it out?
Is this like a summer, so you're at least here during a good time, or?
It was the fall.
Oh,
it was the fall.
well,
it was like September to December.
Bad ending to that, but beginning's fine.
Well, I mean, the part was that I was, sort of post-grad school in that high of also sort of the most idealistic work you could make for yourself. To be sort of thrust by myself kind of in Portland was definitely hard that fall. And what's funny is that, again, like, Wieden was sort of the first ad agency I got to work at. And at the time I was like, you think this is cool? Like, is this cool? Like, I don't know if this is cool, And then, of course, it was such a rude awakening that, after that internship, I go back to New York and start working at all the other major shops. And I was like, oh, it's different. I was like, oh, okay. Now I know in context why, what makes Wieden so unique compared to a lot of other agencies. So interestingly enough, for the next 13 years after that internship, I'm working around New York, and I always switched from freelance to full-time, in-house, at a brand to a studio, also between design director or art director. And that all, of course, just reflects my own interest and wanting to try all of those different formats to feel like what was feeling right for me.
Yeah.
So, it was really cool getting to work like I was design director at MAC Cosmetics for 3 years.
Wow.
And then sort of jumping into beauty, fashion, image making is just such a unique world in of itself.
And that's a fascinating like connection point with like the idea that your work is like kind of trying to essentially think of like what is the facade on something. Mac is just making facades essentially.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Because the true reason that inspired me to work in graphic design, being a stylist, getting to create fantasy spectacle, it was, I think, the fit with Vegas upbringing was really right on for that time at Mac for sure. So then, what was so fun was that we might get a tray of cosmetics, and just based off the colors of what's going to be popular, 3 seasons away, you get to create a story. You get to create what should that beauty image, what it should be, what that product image should be, what the story is. And it was at such a fast pace because it was every season we'd release about 20, 25 products and just constantly conceptualizing images. But then once the image is shot, then we're conceptualizing the design program for that specific product launch. And then that design culminated in a magazine that we would call Magazine. And that's where sort of
good name.
The entire season visually would be presented. And then those were given to the digital team, store design, store event team to sort of say, here's the look for the season. So it was so exciting. Again, it was like earlier in my design career where it's like, okay, I'm seeing this really cool image and I'm designing the logo that's supposed to stand on top of this image. But I was always like, who got to make the image?
Yeah.
And then even in getting to make the image, sometimes I'd be like, who got to pick the tray of colors? That now I'm basing this image on. So I think constantly too, it sort of was me trying to find that sort of seed of idea of creativity of like, I want to get closer and closer to that.
Yeah, like you're doing the Eames like power of 10 thing, but down to
Yes.
the level that you want to be at in
Yes.
terms of creative selection of things.
Exactly.
That's incredible to think about. And it's also, I'm just kind of marveling at the idea that essentially like you are building a visual brand book that then gets sliced and diced by the rest of the Mac team in order to come up with like how that season actually works and all the parts and pieces of it.
Yeah, that was what was really cool, because often too, with our creative director, if he's looking at a new crop, even just for like a display at a store, he wants to reference the zine because he's like, wait, how did we crop this? So those approvals also were always the hardest because it was the first one. And then once, those decisions were made, the rest were kind of like following a certain system.
Yeah, you're building case law essentially for for this art direction.
Yeah, so I was there initially for 2 years. And so much fun, learned so much. I was, I think, getting a bit tired of the constant amount of work and the sort of like working seasonally.
Yeah.
So
it sounds kind of relentless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, like, part of the thing that was so freeing about that was like, this stuff exists in the world for 3 months, Like, and I think sometimes we forget about that. So it really helped me remember how graphic design is ephemeral in so many ways, and
it
so
lives or dies in 13-week cycles.
Exactly. So then there's something that can make you sad about that, like, oh my god, I put so much work into this thing. Again, all those details where you often feel like I'm the only one that will notice or ever know this. And at Mac, it felt even on SuperDrive because it was all by season.
Yeah.
And the thing that was great was that whether something's good or bad, it's gone in a few weeks.
Truly.
So it to use that as something powerful to give you to allow yourself to do whatever you want, to at least even try it and see what's right, and sort of not limit yourself in that way. And then I got contacted by Mother in New York, and they had just won a piece of Calvin Klein business. So again, it was kind of like my move into a more traditional advertising space. But again, it was like because of the work I did in beauty that made them interested in my perspective. Suddenly going back to agency, that project lasted almost an entire year of what we were working on before it came out. And then again, I
must have been just a huge relief to be able to think that long about a single thing.
Well, what's funny is that it was and it wasn't, right?
Yeah,
because
that's true.
Again, what's interesting is like, okay, now I have a whole year to work on something that's going to last 2 months.
Yeah.
So again, it's a kind of there's the stress and what you deal with that very short deadline, and then there's the other kind of stress and things you deal with that very long, luxurious timeline. And it actually was, Mac asked me to come back, and that was a big part of it. And like, okay, I kind of miss the pace and again, the ephemeralness that everyone kind of bought into.
Oh, interesting.
Because I have to say on some of the projects sometimes at an ad agency, again, it's like you're working on it for so long that again, it feels sometimes more important than you imagine it to be, much more important than it is. So then I was back at Mac for a year, and then Anomaly reached out, and again they had just won Sally Hansen, the nail polish company, so they wanted me to work on that. So what was so interesting, sort of post grad school, was that the shift from I can work for you, I can do any kind of design work that makes sense for you and your clients, to here's my design work, do you want it or not?
Yeah.
Was such a powerful shift in suddenly getting the work I actually wanted. Was to actually, if you want the work you want, you have to ignore and deprioritize the work that you're not that interested in.
That is such good advice. Don't put anything in your portfolio you don't want to work on.
Exactly. And I know, like, I always have to have my disclaimer of like, as a student, you're getting a lot of assignments and there's a lot of stuff you have to learn. Yeah. Again, technically. But I think always figuring out how to infuse, again, your personal history, your vision, what you can create that no one else can is that much more important. And yeah.
But it's 100% true. It's 100% true. Like, and that's what has these companies like, calling on. So you go to work for Anomaly, and then how long are you at Anomaly?
I was there only 6 months, and that was mainly because there was some family personal issues that made me decide, okay, I want to live closer to my family back on the West Coast. So at that point, I had been on the East Coast for almost 10 years at that point. So it's like, okay, now I'm sort of ready to move back to LA.
And that's, just a hop, skip, and a jump from Vegas.
Exactly.
Via Barstow, a place that famously does not have a Five Guys yet. That's a pretty big shift in terms of what you're doing too, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my time in New York was at a lot of big corporations, agencies, etc. I get out to LA. I'm starting to freelance at agencies out in LA, but then get this opportunity with a wheat startup. So I get to meet the CEO founder. She's amazing. We get along really well. And so the first 2 years was just the two of us.
Yeah.
It was such an incredible experience to be, that's my first time as a creative director, that I am setting the vision. But then, of course, I am setting the vision, and then I am designing the vision, and I am sending out the mechanicals of that vision.
You're probably doing a lot of sweeping up also.
Yes, exactly. So, creative director of one, which is still very cool and amazing. And I had not participated in the cannabis world very much before that position. But of course, I was coming in with a lot of, okay, we're expecting this canna-curious consumer, now that it's legal in California, to be really interested in cannabis. So we wanted to create something that was very beautiful and high-end and and lovely and low THC. So one thing, a great lesson I learned was sort of coming in and obviously legal cannabis in California through medical, decades, has been around for decades. And I would look at some of these homegrown brands and be kind of like, oh, does this look trustworthy? Does this look cool or slick or interesting at all? And I just thought, wow, you make a great, beautiful brand and you're just going to do gangbusters in the cannabis world.
Yeah, because I would say traditional cannabis brands check none of those boxes.
Yeah.
If there's a way to sort of subtract things from a checkbox, I think most of them would sort of fall in that zone.
Yes, exactly. And we were very far ahead of our time because people weren't quite interested in that product yet. And so a lot of the dispensaries would say, okay, no one's quite interested in a low THC product. But so it was such a humbling experience to be like, wait, we're not a success with just the amazing design, And so over the years that I worked at Besito, what was very cool was that I'd go to a lot of industry trade shows and see all the brands all at once. And of course, day by day, there were like cooler, really tasteful brands being launched. And I would realize it's kind of boring, or it's kind of there's something here that feels less true to cannabis itself. And I would start gravitating towards finding the brands that were still kind of look like it was being done out of their garage. And I ended up realizing how cool it was. I feel like when I was first, getting so interested in graphic design, it was like, even like, oh, I hate this shampoo label. I wish I could redesign it. Or like kind of wanting everything in my world to be perfect and beautiful. And then just realizing like, oh, it's so interesting when things in the world aren't perfect, and so, just so uniquely of its own culture. So it was such a great lesson to be like, I thought I knew more because I know what makes a more beautiful beauty image of a woman smoking a joint. But that has very little to do with what a consumer might be looking for when trying to choose what cannabis brand they want to use.
Nobody wants their cannabis to be fully goopified.
Exactly. So that's when it's just like, okay, like that was such a big lesson for me, where it was like, again, it's a sort of letting go of this idea of design needing to make the world look a specific way versus it like it can make the world look so different and unique to each of those things through design.
Where do you go from Besito?
So post Besito, I worked at Stink Studios.
A great name. A powerful name, some might say.
And that was an amazing experience. And Stink Studios used to be called Stink Digital and came out of the production company Stink Films.
The Stink cinematic universe, of course.
Exactly. Well, their logo is a fish bone, like the bones of a fish that say stink. So
that's a missed opportunity because I feel like it should be 3 wavy lines. That's
yeah.
How could they have missed 3 wavy lines right there? Fishbone is what comes out of sort of a cartoon cat's mouth after they've inserted a whole stinky fish that they found in a trash can.
Exactly.
How do you think the cats in the cartoons do that, where they put the fish in their mouth and then fish bones come out?
Well, they do it the same way I do it.
There's just sort of a series of nanoprobes in there that are sort of removing the fish skin.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I have to think that's what Heathcliff is up to, and his junkyard gang, I think is what they're called. Heathcliff, write in. Let me know what the name of the cats that are in your gang is. Is it the Junkyard Gang, or am I thinking of a different orange cartoon cat that has a gang? But yeah, so like, what do you end up doing at Stink?
So Stink was really fun. It was a huge management role as ECD.
Oh, wow.
So sort of heading up creative. It was, of course, during the pandemic. So a very hard time for all of us, sort of.
A great time for the advertising industry. I remember so many memorable commercials of stock video of people sort of looking worried, all in isolation.
Yeah, so you can imagine, it was just sort of a rough time. Everyone was working remotely and communicating and of course trying our best. But for me, of course, it was there's a lot bigger fish to fry than graphic design necessarily at the time. Of course, we're all trying to figure out how to continue work and have our livelihood and feel safe. But it was a very tough time, of course, for all of us. So kind of post that experience, when this opportunity came up at Wieden currently to come as a senior creative, I was very excited to get back into the work and in less of a managerial role. And just again, kind of post-pandemic, take that time again for myself to figure out, okay, what am I looking for? What do I want to participate in? Because I'm sure I speak for many, many people where sometimes we can get in our heads about design. Just, I don't know, sometimes when the world is heading the way it is, sometimes you're like, is this that important?
Yeah.
So important to remember that it is, but it's also very important for you to figure out what is important to you about it. I think so much of what I took away at my time at Stink was that, I take a lot of meaning through mentorship, through what I can do for people as a friend, as a creative director, to make sure that they're feeling safe, because obviously you make your best work when you're feeling psychologically safe. So it was just a sort of a completely different challenge in a lot of ways. So I think important that anywhere you are in your career, you are constantly checking in with yourself, with what is working for you and what isn't. And I think as creatives, that's both our blessing and our curse, is that we often aren't totally happy, and because we can always imagine something better as creatives and what we want. It is about finding, okay, where am I getting meaning from this?
Yeah.
And sometimes, even if it is something that's a set of life skills beyond professional, that you're just learning through a difficult situation, through communication, or how to actually work with difficult people, like all of those are adding to your bank of skills as well, and are important things to learn. But I think important to be like, okay, I'm not getting the part that I want, then it's time to move on.
Yeah, I think doing that checking in about yourself is so important. But I think it's also like, I think to go back to maybe where you started in like that transition between undergrad and graduate school, where you learned, if I put more of myself in the work, then it actually reaches people. What that self is that's inside that work too is always going to be changing. Mm-hmm, and I think like this is another permutation of that. You felt like you had another stage of growth that you wanted to explore, and now you're up here.
Yeah.
You've been back at Wieden for 3 months now,
I've been at Wieden now a year and a half.
Oh, actually. A year and a half. Good job, Sean. A year and a half. Wow.
But I got to, I was living in LA when I started. So I had 6 months in LA and then moved up to Portland at the very end of last year. So we're coming up on my first year living up here in Portland.
Well, it is so good to have you here. It feels like the connection that you kind of started your career with, and now you're here again.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the coolest parts, because even someone I was partnered with as an intern, when I came back, she was my CD at Wieden. And it was so interesting because over that time of 14 years, she was at Wieden, and I, had tried all these different little things. And so just so interesting of like, again, like how different everyone's path is, and what they're interested in, and what's exciting about something or what isn't. So yeah, it definitely felt like a full circle moment coming back. And also again, at that very beginning, when I didn't know very much about advertising, to come back with all that kind of knowledge of understanding what I don't like and what I do like that's so powerful. And I say that too with grad school, where it's a kind of like, I'm so happy that I worked for a few years between undergrad and grad school, because it made my grad school so much more focused, because it was like, oh, I know this whole part of graphic design that I'm not that interested in or didn't excite me. So what else can I explore? And again, so many of those things, it's like, it's individual to each of us. So
Yeah.
sometimes you think you're very interested in something, and then you try it and then you hate it. And I think the important part is that like every step is a step forward, even when it's like, I didn't like that. It's like, okay, good. You're like getting clearer on what you want to try next.
Absolutely. I think that is a great message to leave all the young designers in our audience with. Eli, where can people find you if they want to kind of learn more about you and your work?
Yes. Well, my website is welikeHim.com, and that comes straight from high school. Ely Kim, we like him.
I had never made that connection until now. I've been looking at that website now for I think 3 months, and it makes a lot of sense.
And of course, that the website is literally just my info at email currently.
But it's powerful looking.
Yes, it's worth. Yeah, go check out a great email button. So otherwise, I mean, I'm on Instagram as We Like Him. Again, don't post that much, but you know it. But I do every once in a while, of course. So yeah, I'm around. I can be found for sure.
So go find Eli, listeners. Thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you for having me. So much fun.
Oh, it's such a treat. And thank you to all our listeners who now we've made it through season 5. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. This is a great time to do it if you haven't, done it in a while. And I know for a fact that you haven't. So go do it. And also please tell anyone and everyone you know about the show. If there's maybe somewhere else you'd rather hear the show, why not visit diditothat.design and check out all the options? That's also where you can find some images that go along with each and every episode, and follow us on both Instagram and our brand new newsletter, which hopefully I will have mailed out by the time that I've sent this. I will not spam you because I keep forgetting that I have it. This has been... Hold on. Sorry. I thought everything had been muted. I'm so sorry. This is so unprofessional of me. You know what? Actually, you know where it's coming from? There's this little thing that came with the studio. It's like a Ring camera, but it's like not evil. I never use it, but let me pull up the app and see what. Actually, Eli, you didn't drive a Cube here today, did you?
I didn't. No.
A Nissan Cube, a bright red Nissan Cube, because there's one parked right out in front of the studio, and it's really weird. I mean, more weird than a regular Nissan Cube looks, which is pretty weird.
Weird.
It's strangely generalized in its design. Like, there's no specific driver's seat. There's no like steering wheel or engine from the look of it. It just looks like a whole lot of like fluorescent lighting and a Coca-Cola freestyle machine where the back seat should be. I feel like we should see what's going on. Should we hail them?
Let's hail.
Okay, we are hailing.
We are Five Guys. We have analyzed your marketing capabilities. Your content distinctiveness will be assimilated into the marketing apparatus. Resistance is delicious.
They found us. I don't know how, but they found us. Well, we might be in trouble. The Cube is emitting a tractor beam. They're tractoring out a perfectly cylindrical section of the studio's soundproofing. Now you'll really hear all the train sounds.
Warning. The structural integrity field has collapsed.
Oh no, we're being sucked into. Oh God.
A405, quinary adjunct of Unimatrix 05.
Yes, 305.
Here is a joke. How many Five Guys does it take to screw in a light bulb?
5.
5. The answer was present in the question, for maximum efficiency. Five Guys strives for maximum efficiency.
We strive for perfection.
We must deliver quality at higher cost,
Perfection.
maximum efficiency.